Hello turtles! Welcome back to another outside game dev adventure where we're going to be talking about whether crunch is actually good for indie developers. While we go, I'm going to be taking you for a hike up Bald Mountain where there's a fire tower and we get to look out across the huge mountain range. It's pretty awesome up there. What exactly constitutes as crunch is something we should discuss first and foremost. Crunch is interesting because I think it's a little bit more than just putting in some extra hours longer than your normal workday. Some people are probably going to disagree with that. It could also depend on how many hours extra we're talking about, like 1 or 2, probably still not crunch. 6 to 8, probably definitely a crunch, right? But I also think there's a little bit of energy tied to it. I think you can still wind up crunching yourself even if you're working a normal 8-hour day, if you're pushing yourself to a maximum 100% effort every moment of that 8 hours. It also depends on what else is going on in your life a little bit. But I would basically say that pushing extra hours for long periods of time or pushing a really high level of focus and really push to get stuff done in short periods of time, that is crunch. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but we'll talk about some of the risks and consequences a little bit later. For now, let's enjoy the woods. You may notice it is fall time. In fact, we are beyond the peak colors. And I decided if any of the turtles want to see the colors of Vermont as it changes to fall, I better record it before they all go away. So we're going to be listening to the leaves as I step. Hopefully this is not too loud for the video. If you're trying to make a career out of indie game development, that is to say, you're trying to sell your own games and make a living from that, not from another full-time job, even if you have one today, then you're starting a business. And starting a business is hard and time-consuming. Is crunch good for indies? It might be. There's definitely some negatives and things to watch out for, and there's also some benefits. Whew, this is pretty. There's a stream. Anyway, what are the differences between crunching for a company in the industry and crunching for yourself as an indie? When you're starting a business, it's going to be hard and time consuming. And effectively, you're almost signing up for crunch. I'm not saying that you can't mitigate that and that you shouldn't mitigate that, because you really should. But it's not like you're going to a regular job where you show up, do some work, and get a paycheck. You have to put in a lot more legwork than that. That said, crunch as an indie developer is very different than crunch in the industry. For one, you own the project. It is your own IP, your own game, your own everything. You get all the benefits of the crunch. It is really naked up here. The trees are almost entirely bare. Look at that. There's no leaves up there. So yeah, as an indie developer, it's your choice. You're the one setting the deadlines. There may be consequences for setting those deadlines or changing them or missing them, but you're still the one deciding what needs to happen before that deadline. This is where crunch almost produces itself, because it's not as simple as just saying, I'm going to set a deadline that is safe and easy to make without doing any crunch hours or putting in extended effort. Because as you get closer and closer to the deadline, you tend to care about your project and you want to make it the best it possibly can be. You try meeting or exceeding that deadline, and in trying to exceed it, you tend to put in more effort than you initially thought. And that's where I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. As an employee, it sucks. Often an employee doesn't get any benefits of crunch. And I think any company that is asking their employees to crunch should also be willing to pay them extra, even if they're on salary. And there are definitely companies out there that do. Many game companies handle crunch differently. I've even worked at a place that had a no crunch policy, which was kind of odd given the rest of my experience, but they held true to that belief. I've also had others that gave me a nice good death march to just crunch the whole time. This goes back to my definition of crunch, where I believe as an indie, you might be putting in long hours that somebody else might be considering crunch, but it's not necessarily draining you. It could even be energizing you as you see progress on your project. And that can still lead you to burnout. Don't get me wrong, that is still possibly problematic. The trees here have green leaves still. What? Behind me right now, it's basically vibrant green and yellow. And then behind me over here, basically negative. Interesting. As the boss or indie developer, you get to choose whether you crunch or not, where the deadlines are, and all sorts of other things. You could be signing deals with publishers, and so it's not entirely your, 100% your call. You could be being pressured into this thing still, but it's, at the end of the day, it's still kind of your call. Whereas as an employee, you're being asked to do this, and you got to choose not to. Sometimes companies are just asking to see if you can put in effort, and not actually legitimately asking you to crunch. Now, maybe the management shouldn't be asking that in the first place and should change that whole system, but there are places out there that if you said no, they would be willing to accept it. There are also other places that won't, and you could probably be replaced by somebody that is willing to crunch. So that comes with the consequences. Every choice we make, including getting up out of bed in the morning, has consequences. So, potentially getting fired from a job is one of the consequences from choosing not to crunch. But there's also other consequences of crunching in the first place, even as an indie developer. One of them is the risk of burnout. You might get burned out in an extended crunch or a very hard, focused, pushed crunch, right? Like if you push really, really hard, you could possibly burn yourself out, and it's really hard to notice that effect. It's something that you don't notice until after it's happened. When I was in the industry, there was basically a death march crunch, which is, 6 months of extended crunch. I was working from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. almost every night, possibly even later, most Saturdays, some Sundays, and it was just a constant. That's what life was for almost 6 months. Every Wednesday I was trying to meet this milestone that constantly moved, and I didn't really notice anything too bad at the time. There was the team camaraderie. There was, the team emotional support together. Everyone had their war stories, and it didn't feel bad necessarily. You could tell that you weren't as effective as you wanted to be, but what really was the telling sign is after it was all over, when the crunch actually ended, like that project shipped, and I finally got home at a normal time, 6 p.m., right? I got home at 6 p.m. and I asked myself, the literal first thought through my mind was, what am I supposed to do now? The very next thought is, I should never be asking this question. Basically, it was too early to go to bed, and the only thing I had been going home for is shower, bed, done. Like that was the only thing I had been doing for 6 months, and it had got to be a pattern that when I finally broke that pattern, I got home and I was like, what do I do now? I hope no one has to deal with that. That's just ridiculous. If you can limit the amount of time that you are under crunch, you're going to reduce the risk of burnout and some of the other effects quite drastically. Crunching for a weekend is a lot different than sustaining a crunch time for a full 6 months. It's actually one of the things I don't like about game jams. It sort of romanticizes the idea of crunch time. And you can do a game jam without crunching. I've done a couple Ludum Dares where I only put 4 hours of effort on Sunday. So it's possible to do a game jam without crunching. But it's also somewhat pressured, because if you do want to get good results, you do need to put in the effort, and you do need to crunch. And not only crunch, but you need to have a very efficient workflow, and things need to fall into place. It's challenging enough just to make a game in a weekend. And if you're trying to get good results, you really need to have the efficient workflows. You need to know what you're doing. If crunch has all these negative consequences, why would anybody want to crunch? And there's many reasons. We all want our projects to be as good as they possibly can, which means if we don't set a deadline, we're just going to keep working on them indefinitely. And as an indie developer trying to sell games, you need to lower your cost of development. Setting a deadline can help with that. Setting a tight deadline can help with that even further. Obviously, it comes with the risks we talked about, but those are some of the reasons that you might decide to set a deadline of only working on this for a month, and then we ship what we get, and hopefully you can make enough headway. That's what I did with Accelerate. I was fairly confident I could make a solid game in that period of time, and I sure did. As the project comes to an end, you just naturally want to make it the best it possibly can be, and you see the end coming, so you go for it. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. Also, deadlines, trying to manage multiple projects, having events to go to, or conferences, or so many other things can be creating deadlines for you that you need to hit. Like maybe you're trying to create a demo for Next Fest, and you're gonna naturally want that demo to be as good as it can, so you're gonna push for it. It's just how it goes. And that's kind of where I go back to saying that not all crunch is bad, nor is putting extra hours in necessarily crunch. Another possible reason to put many hours in rather than trying to take breaks is it can help your momentum. If you're naturally putting in solid hours on your project, you've got the momentum up already. And yes, you can't keep that momentum up for super long periods of time, at least without risking burnout, as we talked about. But if you keep it managed and listen to your energy levels, you can still get quite far. Hi turtles. It's been a hell of a push. Trees are getting smaller. We're almost near the top. Look what I see. See the cabin. It's a little shelter up here. There's a fire tower. Also, another reason for crunch that a lot of studios might be feeling now or very soon is changes to licenses. Maybe a tool changed a license and you have to port your whole game to another engine, and you didn't plan on that, but you still want to get it done at a certain period of time. Like I said, as an indie developer, as a business, your time is your money. You have to pay for living expenses. You have to support yourself. Each month you add on to the development of your game increases its cost, not insubstantially. It doesn't matter if I work 40 hours in a month or 200 hours in a month. The cost is always going to be $1,250 at a minimum. So every month I spend on my game is guaranteed $1,250 right out of the bucket. And from my research, racing games on Steam are typically getting $10,000 to $15,000 unless you get a hit. My hands are cold. Oh my gosh. I've been up here for the winter solstice, and I don't think it was this cold then. Of course, I was bundled up a little better, but oh, it's cold this time. With all this talk about crunch, is crunch necessary because Unity is making it harder to become an indie dev? Check out my next video where I discuss whether Unity is making it harder to become an indie dev. If you guys like this video, please give it a thumbs up, share the video with other developers, and leave a question or comment below. I'll get to it in a future video. Until later, turtles, have a good one. It's super windy. I can feel the floor move. Yeah, we're gonna get down.